welcome to Whiskeys for Drinking, Waters for Fighting, because we always seem to be fighting about water. And we've got a group of people around a table here today, and it's a virtual table, and we're going to be kicking around something that's a new topic about water. Let's just introduce who's here. Darren, kick us off.
All right. Hi, Jeff. This is Darren Smith, Chief Technology Officer for Encore Green Environmental.
Hey, Jeff. John Robitaille, CEO, Encore Green Environmental.
Hey, Jeff. Marvin Nash, Senior Advisor, Encore Green Environmental, and a consultant, I guess, per se, for Synergy for Ecological Solutions.
Neal Fehringer, still in my Billings, Montana bunker. I'm an agronomist, so I'm the Director of Agronomy, Encore Green and Carbon Asset Network.
And I'm Jeff Holder. I'm the director of the nonprofit Synergy for Ecological Solutions, where our mission is climate wellness through soil health. And today we're going to be talking about water, which is what we always talk about. But really, I'm not a guy who is a scientist at all. And so to me, I don't know, water's water. And so I thought I'd just kind of toss it out a little free form here to the group here. Now, I'll tell you what I know about water, okay? I know that water, I remember from science, is made up of, 2 hydrogen and 1 oxygen, right? It's a compound. That's where it ends for me. So I hear things like, well, water, it's good water, it's bad water. We talk about treating water as part of what Encore Green Environmental does, is test what's in water. Neal, I've heard you mention about, well, that water from some springs isn't good for some types of vegetation. And help us here. What is I understand the chemical makeup from a theoretical, I can picture the 2 molecules and the 1 molecule, from science class, but somebody help me. Just, isn't water water? How is water so different from each other?
Yeah, sure. So you're absolutely right, Jeff. When we talk about water, you're absolutely right. Water is a compound, hydrogen and oxygen. But when people commonly, here's another factoid about water. Water is also known as the universal solvent. And it gets that name because most everything that can be ionized, most everything that can be dissolved will dissolve to some degree in water. When people think about water, they're not actually thinking about the compound because that's the pure form. They're thinking about the things that are dissolved in it, right? So, people talk about, okay, my water's too hard and I need a water softener at my house. Well, that's because of the things that are dissolved in it. Or some people have orange coloration on their fixtures because there's iron that's dissolved in the water that has come out and oxidized on your fixtures. So water and what's dissolved in it represents a continuum of dissolved solutes. You can have water that's so pure that it's almost distilled. And when we say distilled, that means all the things that are dissolved in it have been removed. There's naturally occurring water that's coming off glaciers, for instance, that's almost distilled, and then you can have naturally occurring groundwater that is highly contaminated with dissolved solutes in it. So water also can be adjusted for different purposes. Different industrial purposes require different things to be added or removed from water. Water that's used for drinking and potability has to have standards associated with it, so it's safe for human consumption. Neal will talk to us about water that's fit for irrigation. Has to either have certain criteria met to make sure that plants can thrive in it and soils aren't damaged by it and things like that. So water, think of water as just kind of a continuum of a different variety of salts in different concentrations. And all those salts can be either adjusted and added or subtracted to meet different purposes.
So you're saying that, like groundwater, things have gotten into it, chemicals that's in the soil that's surrounding it, right? It's not sitting in a glass jar underneath the ground. It's sitting in a formation of some kind. Is that what you mean? Like, how do all these chemicals and all these different things get into the water in the first place?
Right. So the geology contains these salts or these solutes or these ions. So the geology contains it, and then when it comes in contact with water, they dissolve into the water. So water will be able to extract it from the geology. That's how water picks up ions from the geology, just merely being in contact with it.
So it's something that is, because, as you said at the very beginning, it's what things dissolve into. So it's sort of universally that if there is a solid of some nature or chemicals of some nature, if it comes in contact with the water takes it in, so to speak, at least at some level. Is that right?
That's right. That's right. And so the other thing about water being a universal solvent, it also can hold a tremendous amount of salts in it, right? So to put this in perspective, distilled water essentially has if you took a sample of distilled water and heated it and evaporated all the water away and then measured what was left in it, distilled water would have virtually nothing. You take a sample of seawater, for instance, and you take a liter of seawater and evaporated that, it would leave 30 grams of salt behind, essentially 30 to 33 grams. So, and then by the time water is saturated, you could have upwards of 370 grams of salt contained in a liter of water. So that gives you kind of a range for how much salt water can actually hold. Just a little factoid there for you, Jeff. Just so we're gonna make you a scientist by the time you're done. By the time we're all done with these podcasts.
Right, because I live a very practical life. If I want water, I turn on the faucet. So I don't. What's going on behind it is just a little bit of a mystery to me. I'll just go ahead and go on record with my ignorance. So, Neal, maybe tell us a little bit about why some water then that would be natural, right? I've seen the commercials for bottled water, right? Is that natural water that's coming out of the ground, and it's so beautiful and it's so crystal, and you just want to drink it. Can you drink it, and can you put it on vegetation, or is the answer, well, it depends?
It depends. So we do have to test it. I do want to follow up on a couple things that Darren said before I get into expanding upon my water diatribe here this morning. So just for people that aren't familiar, Darren is originally from Canada, so he does talk in metric. So a gram is roughly a paper clip. So you'd have 30 paper clips away. And then, what's that?
I love that. The paperclip thing. I love it. So I got 33 paper clips.
So water has paper clips? I'm so lost.
It can. If you leave a paper clip long enough in water, you'll have paper clips in water. That's what we're talking about.
Oh, because it would rust.
Yeah, it would dissolve. It'll dissolve. That's right.
So then the other thing is, as I try to teach some people, the conversion is a pound is a big block Chevy engine, a 454 grams in a pound. So if you have a trouble remembering, it's the big block engine.
I love these are great. I love these, Neal. Love it.
So essentially, also an ounce in our measuring system is roughly 29.69 grams. So, or around 29 grams. So that kind of gives you an idea of a little conversion. So to get back to your question, Jeff, so water is not water. In my 40 years experience as an agronomist here in Montana, I've seen a number of cases where people find water in their place, either from a spring or a shallow well, and they think because it's water, they can use it to irrigate with. Well, as Darren talked about with the dissolved solutes in there, and we're talking about not necessarily chemicals, because I think a lot of people may think chemicals as some sort of pesticide or something like that. What we're talking about is elements and other molecules, such as the elements would be calcium, magnesium, sodium. Then you get into chlorides and bicarbonates as a molecule, oxygen, carbon, and hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen. Sulfates, which is sulfur and oxygen. So those are the ones, positive and negative ions, that contribute to what we call conductivity. So the more of those elements and compounds that are in the water, the more electricity will pass through the water. When you add those salts to the soil, the plant then has to fight those salts in the soil for the water by osmotic pressure is what it is. And so there's a whole range of plants. You take a blue spruce tree is really sensitive to salts in the soil. You take Russian wild rye grass, a perennial grass, that's a range grass, it's very tolerant to salt. So if we have waters, we look at the test, then I can match them up the water and say, okay, if you grow these crops, you can use this water. So low salt containing water, say that the Yellowstone River that passes through Billings here has a conductivity of around 350 during the irrigation season, micromoles per centimeter. That would be, say, about 230 milligrams per liter of TDS, total dissolved solids. And you can't see a water, tell the difference between, say, distilled water and water that's high in salts or high TDS by pouring them in a glass and look at them, because they're dissolved. It's like if you take salt or sugar or a combination of the two, pour it in water and stir it around, and it dissolves, and compare it to the original water, you can't tell the difference by observing it. We have to test it. And so then it's not only how many salts are in the water, but then what ratios. So one of the things is if your water's high in calcium, then you have hard water, and the soap doesn't suds. You put in a water softener that pulls the calcium out, puts some sodium in, and then you get where the soap will suds. But when that water that's higher in sodium goes on the soil, because sodium breaks down the surface tension of water, that destroys the soil structure. So we have to have them in the right ratio, and that ratio in water, we determine that by sodium absorption ratio, and the acronym is SAR. So we want primarily calcium and magnesium is in the denominator. Okay, we're going to go with some math here. So you got to come back to fractions. The denominator is the lower number, sodium concentration is the upper number. So if the sodium is elevated, the number's higher, and that causes your problems. To lower it, you have to add some calcium and increase the bottom number of the denominator. And so then we return the soil structure. I have seen either soil that has become sodic naturally over when it was created by what ions were in the parent material, or by applying sodic water to it. And then we bring it back and reclaim it by putting on gypsum, which is calcium sulfate, to increase the calcium levels. So some examples I've seen in my 40 years is the high school in Laurel, Montana, which is west of Billings. We tested their water because they couldn't keep their grass on the football field growing. The blue spruce trees on their campus were dying from the bottom up, and their water had a conductivity of around 3,000 micromoles per centimeter. And again, as I said, the Yellowstone River is about 350, so it's got a tenth of less salts than that well water. Well, after I tested the water and gave them information, and they moved away from using that water. Another well, a guy had a shallow well, he was irrigating with it, and he was ruining his land. It had a conductivity of 5,000 micromoles. So water is not water. And whether it comes out as a spring, I had a third example was a gentleman that had a place northeast of my property here, that he developed a spring. The water was coming out the side hill. All springs are is groundwater under pressure, and they come out someplace, and as they pass through the soil, they pick up all the ions, elements that are in that soil. In Montana, we are not using groundwater for irrigation. It is surface water coming out of rivers, and you do have to watch that too, because the groundwater, this was the soils were created from Lebo shale, and it was an infancy, so we have a lot of elements in it. Water is not water, and you have to know not only the total conductivity, but what are the ratios in there, and are they going to build up in the soil and cause soil problems?
Let me jump in here because I'm kind of simple, I'm kind of simple-minded. So water is not water. At the end of the day, I've got one question. Do we have the scientific capability, the agronomy capability, the soil science capability, the water treatment technology capability, and the communication ability to take this water that's not water, but make it beneficial? And can we communicate and scientifically prove to that environmentalist that is concerned? I mean, I'm not much of a politician, But last night, our president, like him, don't like him, everybody's personal opinion, he touched on the subject of we've got water going through lead pipes, which is causing unhealthy development of kids and children and life and death and all of those kind of things. At the end of the day, do we have the scientific technology to overcome all of the things that you and Darren have talked about and make water beneficially usable water? Because to me, that's the question. I'm not going to get off in the woods of what it is. You guys are scientists. Y'all can address that. The main concern is, and John Robitaille oftentimes talks about, if we could create water in the right places, we could increase the population of grouse, which is a big conversation. You know, we could increase the health and well-being of our fowl and of our deer and our antelope populations and all those kind of things if we did those conversions and put water where we may not have water. Do we have the scientific capabilities to overcome all the things that y'all talked about? And if so, you know, what's the guy that puts a statement up out in the city park on a picnic table and says, convince me otherwise? Convince me that we have that technology and the capability to do that. And Darren or John or Neal, probably all three of you could comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, I can start. So I think the simple answer is yes. Any of the things we don't want in water, we have the technology to remove. And anything that's lacking in water, we have the ability to add. So if we understand what the quality of water needs to be for its use, because we understand things like what Neal was talking about, what plants require, what soil requires, what animals require, what humans require. If we understand what the endpoint needs to be, the water quality endpoint, we can adjust water with technology to meet it. We either take things out or put things in. So I think the answer to your question is yes.
So Darren, some of my counterparts, and especially a young man that I've met over the years that writes for Rolling Stone magazine, and he's he's an environmentalist. He'll tell you that straight up. Justin and I've had a lot of conversations and Environmental Defense Fund meetings, some of those kind of things. They'll say, especially talking about produced water as byproduct water, they'll say, well, we don't know what to test for. We're not doing the right test to find out what's in there. So yes, we can do it. Convince me that scientifically we do know what to test for, or in our case in Wyoming, the DEQ told us what to test for, and we were able to do that and meet the parameters that they set forth. Because the closer you get to making any water of value, trust me, there's going to be less whiskey drinking and a lot more fighting about water, because it's going to become a commodity and its value is going to increase. So
yeah,
tell me what that, test is.
I think I could probably get to that. So we talked about all these things that dissolve in water, and really these solutes are in categories. Okay, so there's cations and anions, the typical water nutrients that Neal was talking about. So we have the sodiums, the chlorides, the calciums, the magnesiums, the sulfates, the carbonates, all those sorts of things. I kind of consider those to be the cations and anions, or the water nutrients. Then you have another category of solutes called metals. That's your cadmium, your zinc, your copper, all the metals you're used to hearing about. There's several of those. Then you have organic chemicals, and those are broken up into different categories too. So you have volatile organic chemicals, you have semi-volatile organic chemicals, you have some that are miscible in water, and they all have different categories. You've got things like radionuclides, things like radium 226 and 228. Those are the water-based chemicals that produce radon that everyone's heard about. That's a consideration for things like basements and things like that. Let's see, what else are we missing here? anyway, so we have all these categories, these classifications of compounds and chemicals that can dissolve in water, and there are first of all, there are very precise testing methods to be able to quantify those in water, and there are also set forth from the agencies like the EPA or the DEQs in different states. There's standards that need to be met before these waters can be released to the environment. So we know what the standards are. We know how to test for them. And more importantly, we know how to, if the water that we're proposing to use for beneficial use and for agriculture and things like that, if it doesn't meet them, the important thing to know is that we have technologies to be able to remove them so that we can render just about any water suitable for irrigation uses. Is that kind of what you were heading towards there, wondering about, Marvin?
Yeah, and one of the other things, and we'll talk about this probably in another podcast, but when I went down this pathway, one of the things that I felt like we had to do was, if we refer to water tragedies like Flint, Michigan, where the water got bad and children died, and they found out that there was, some water going down a stream, getting up in a little cove or whatever, and then the bacteria came in it, and somehow it ended up into the water system. If we find those tragedies and those mistakes, it's really not going to be about the science. It's going to be about the human error somewhere along the process. Is that a pretty fair statement that we could all kind of accept? And so what we did at Conservation by Design was we tried to make sure that human error could be controlled, that if it didn't meet parameters, water never went anywhere. It went back and was either retreated or disposed of. Animals have instinct as to what waters they will drink and won't drink. Humans have to depend on other humans to make sure that their water is safe for consumption. I told somebody one time, they were talking about treating water, and I said, look, I don't care if you put 10,000 betta water filters in there and have a bunch of people running the water, as long as it scientifically comes out and tests to meet the parameters. That's what our end goal is. So we're talking about all the science and everything. Neal can control what we're putting on the ground based on what the ground and everything says. How do we make sure that we're doing this safely? Because at the end of the day, everything's good until something goes bad, and then it's a terrible idea. Do we have the capability to make sure that we can never eliminate human error, but can we get it down to 99.99% sure that we're doing it right?
Yeah, so simply the way to do that is just to verify the chemistry of your water with chemical analysis prior to releasing it to the environment. That's right. That's how you verify that the water quality is what you've designed your technology to deliver.
A lot of the water technologies that have been discussed, and again, the better we get at this, the more we're going to fight about water because its value is going to increase. But a lot of the technologies have been continual flow. What we've done internally with our company is we've talked about batching. Is it a fair statement to say that batching probably has less opportunity for failure than continual flow, where it's really kind of a solution to pollution is dilution concept? I mean, are we going to find an exact science on how to be able to verify what we're doing?
I think for the listener, what you mean by batching is that treat a certain volume of water, take an analysis, take a sample, verify that it meets quality through chemical analysis, and then release it. And so that's contrasting to continual flow, whereas you could take a sample on the fly from a continual process, but you'd only be confident that the water quality is meeting your standard at the time that the sample was collected. So you don't have any confidence before or after that sample was collected that your water quality is meeting your standards. So batching is the safest means to be able to verify that the water chemistry is what you intended it to be before you release it to the environment. Because once it's released, then if there happen to be some issues with the water, then now you're talking about perhaps a remediation to correct that. So batching is the safest way to make sure that unintended water quality is not released to the environment.
Hey, John, I'm going to refer to you because I'm always fascinated when we have conversations about your concept of water affects more than just the soil or the plant life. It affects the wildlife and you know, fowl and all those kind of things. What are your thoughts on being able to get this water so that we can not only grow a little bit more grass, capture a little bit more carbon, but actually create a watering hole for grouse so they've got a place to do their dance and breed and get more eggs in the ground? And right now, depending on how much grass you've got, depends on how hard the antelope and the bison and everything are, you know, and deer, how hard they're grazing to try to get their nutrition levels up, and then how hard they're going to graze the grass. What's the confidence level that we can get there?
You know, one of the really interesting things, we'll just pick on the grouse. One of the interesting things that we found with sage grouse was the chick mortality in the spring was one of the driving factors for the population fluctuations. And really what was happening was, if we had a very dry spring, these little chicks, they really feed on small insects that come out of the soil. They hatch out of the soil. They feed on forbs, which is a type of plant, kind of think of it almost as a very watery type of plant. And when we have a very dry year, those things that would feed the chicks are really not available in the amount that would be necessary to really ensure a healthy chick population. So if we can take additional water, such from oil or gas wells, that would otherwise be disposed of, we have technology to clean this water to a level that will not disturb the soil. It will increase plant growth. It will increase the ability of these soils to help hatch these little bugs that these chicks would be able to satisfy themselves with, and the mortality rates would then go down. I'm very confident that we have the ability to do that. We're taking this water, the byproduct water that's being produced, and we're disposing of it in some way rather than putting it to a beneficial use. If we were to put it to this beneficial use, not only would it satisfy the livestock grazing, livestock watering, but anytime we improve the land for livestock, we're improving the land for the wildlife that's also on that land. Anything we can do will improve any of those habitats. We can remove the potential for tremendous wildfires. You know, we had one here in Casper a few years ago that stretched into 2 counties. Simply because it was so dry. It was so dry, and the wind really fought it. And we had firefighters out there with trucks, and those flames just jumped those trucks and went right over the top of them and kept on going. You know, if that grass was a little bit greener due to additional water, that fire wouldn't have that opportunity to run so hard. And by not having that fire run so hard, we would have additional plant material. We would have additional watering opportunities, not only for livestock, but also for any wildlife that's around that area. So really, I think by utilizing this water in a different way, we're really not only satisfying the wildlife, but we're also helping any of the livestock grazing that may be going on. And we know from studies such as Alan Savory, we know that the more that we graze these plants, because they've evolved to depend on grazing, we know that the more grazing we do, the healthier the rangeland becomes. And the healthier the rangeland, of course, the healthier the wildlife that occupies that rangeland as well.
You know, we go from one end of the spectrum to the other. Over the last couple of years, Jeff and I have traveled quite a bit on airplanes and stuff. And I know Jeff has a specific type of water that he likes to, a bottle of water type that he likes to get when we go through the airport. And he'll buy 2 or 3 of them and he'll drink water all day. I personally I don't drink a lot, not near enough water, which we probably all should. But we have the spectrum of Jeff having a thought process of what is the right type of bottled water that he wants to drink. Then we have Neal over here saying water is not water, but yet in the middle we have Darren saying technically we can get the water so that when Neal puts it on the ground, which is the consumer, and the ground is the consumer of the water, just like at the airport, Jeff is the consumer of the bottle of water. Mother Nature and the ground is the consumer of our water. We have a responsibility to protect that consumer and make sure that we're putting the right water. But scientifically, if I'm hearing everybody, we have the ability that if the water is not just perfect, we can get it where it's usable and suitable and can be converted to a beneficial use by using the scientific things that we have. Let me ask, let's go around the table. I don't know where we're at on time, Jeff, but let me go around the table. I want to ask each of you a question. Whose responsibility is it to make sure that we do this and that we increase this use of water and we do this the right way? Is it part of the infrastructure, the gazillion-dollar infrastructure program that we spoke of last night? Is it the responsibility of the E&P who's bringing the water up? Is it the responsibility of the landowner who's going to put it on his ground?
Yeah, sorry, just to clarify,
Jim.
you're talking about the context of for produced byproduct water that the oil well fracking wells are bringing up. Is that's the context, not just water like the municipal water, or is it broad?
I just think let's be really broad. Let's look at, so we have snow melt and that water runs off the mountains and it goes down to, through X, and we've had a fire and that water picks up all the ash and everything and it goes down into a river, and it's not the same snow melt water that we would have had prior to the fire. I know in your state, the wonderful state of California, there's some concern because they're taking some waters and using them they're putting them in the irrigation rivers, and they're using those waters to try to come up with enough volume. But at the end of the day, who's responsible? Because if the water starts increasing in value, the fight is going to increase on who has it. And the question is going to be, if you have it, what is your responsibility to it? So I know we're probably running out of time, Jeff, but I just kind of like to get an opinion from the roundtable and see what their thoughts are on is it part of the infrastructure government program they talked a lot about safe water and EPA. So let's don't focus specifically on just produced or byproduct water. Let's just talk about water. Whose responsibility? Do my taxes need to go up to make sure that I have clean water wherever it's at? Who's responsible for that water?
From my perspective, in my suburban home here in the suburbs of Los Angeles, water to me is kind of a product, and I buy it. I buy it from a agency, right? It's government, and I buy that product. And therefore, the burden, just as I buy any kind of product, and I'm assuming my food is safe and my car won't explode if I crank it, and There's sort of a sense of, if I'm buying a product, then the burden lies with the seller of the product, if you want to think of it that way, to make sure that the water is safe and the water is available and the water is there. At some level, someone who's living in a suburban urban environment, we're completely dependent on the municipalities to bring water to us and essentially sell it to us. We don't have streams nearby, or I'm not very self-sufficient as my family. Like some of you live in different parts of the country may feel a little more self-sufficient. Hey, if the grid goes down, I'm okay. If the municipality doesn't give me water, that's okay. I got a well. Things like that. If you're a suburb, you live in the suburbs, you're buying a product. And so I guess I look at it that whoever is selling me this product is supposed to make sure that I have it and that it's going to be safe. Well,
I might approach it from a different angle. I would suggest that if there is a need for water, we talk a lot in this broadcast about drought in the West. If there's a need for water and there's an abundance of water, then I believe those that are in control of the water have some obligation or some responsibility to, rather than waste it, they have a social responsibility, I believe, to make use of it. And so that responsibility can come in different forms. It could either be to engage people that have the expertise to be able to make beneficial use of it, or those that are in control of it innovate or invest in some innovation to be able to address a need with a resource that they have in their control. So that's where I think that's where the responsibility would come.
My opinion is all of us are responsible. We're responsible for not wasting water. We have to do what we can to ensure that we use the water in a responsible manner. I've been to Uganda on a mission trip, and those people, I have a picture where they got their water before a woman started this group that has gotten grants and stuff to drill wells. It was a pond with lily pads. I wouldn't want to drink it, so I've seen the worst of the worst. And so we are all responsible to do our part and there's no sense putting this byproduct water, oil production water, whatever you want to call it, any water down a hole when we can have the technology to make it a resource instead of a waste.
The water on Earth has been on Earth from the beginning of time. We don't get new water. We get recycled water through the water cycle. It evaporates, it condenses, it rains, that sort of thing. I could not agree more with Darren and Neal. I think the responsibility falls on everyone. We as humans are not the only ones that need water. Plants need water, soil needs water, animals need water. We share our earth with so many things that need water. I think it is critical for all of us to use this water in a responsible manner. If we have additional sources of water, which we do, we need to take every opportunity and use that available water in a responsible manner. And by responsible, I mean beneficially use it. We have technology, we can clean it. We can clean it economically. We can use it on the ground rather than drilling more water wells and pulling water from shallow aquifers, which we may need later. Let's use this water that we have now. Let's use it in a responsible manner. Let's put it to beneficial use.
Yeah, and for a suburbanite, that's things like here in Los Angeles, a lot of us have drought tolerant landscaping, that doesn't need a lot of watering. It has shower heads that are low flow, toilets that are low flow, to just try to take care of at least what we have. And I think that we all do, I set it up like, hey, you're selling me a product and I get to, it sounds very consumer oriented, and it is, because that's kind of the transaction, but the burden does lie still with everybody who gets that water, the end user of the water here in a suburb area, to actually take care of the water that you have and make it last as long as you can.
Wow. I don't know who came up with the idea we ought to do a podcast called Whiskey's for Drinking and Water's for Fighting, but probably when the idea came out, it wasn't that we would get into so many different dimensions of ecology, sustainability, consumer involvement over one little thing called H2O. Wow. Jeff, I'll let you wrap us up. I'm pretty sure we're probably used our 30 minutes on this podcast.
Well, folks, you heard it here first. Water's not water, but it is for fighting. So we look forward to you joining us. Subscribe to us, leave us a review, check the program description, and you'll find some links there for Encore Green Environmental, Synergy for Ecological Solutions, and also a link to the thing that Marvin was describing about the batching process, how some of this produced byproduct water can be put to beneficial use. You'll find a link about that as well. Until next time, let's keep fighting for water.